Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the final part of What If Deku Had a Game Inventory Quirk. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 49. Tenko hummed with interest as the car crested the hill overlooking Daika City. That's new. Why would the place need to be fortified that heavily? It's like they're preparing for a siege. Eraserhead grunted from his position in the back seat. Whatever's going on, it's probably not good. We need as much intel as we can get. Numbers, motives, important names. As much as you can squeeze out of their negotiator. Tenko nodded, before wincing and rubbing at the spot behind his ear where Recovery Girl had implanted a recording device. It would pick up on the vibrations of the bones in his ear and transmit the sound to the receiver at UA. Man, this thing still stings. Good thing there wasn't a speaker in it, too, because that would probably be painful as fuck. Present Mike chuckled, clad in his civilian wear and with his hair down. Hopefully, his drastically different appearance from his hero costume would be enough of a disguise for Tenko to get inside the city. Sorry, can't relate. Comes from having busted eardrums from the moment I could cry. The car slid to a stop a few meters from the northern gate into the city. Standing by the entrance was a blue-skinned woman with black sclera and purple hair, along with a well-dressed man wearing purple-tinted glasses with yellow rims. Eraserhead frowned. Kazuki Chitos and Hanabata Kauku. Interesting. I didn't realize there was a connection between Shueisha Publishing and the Hearts and Minds Party. Tenko grunted. Well, let's just hope they'll take me to Jiren. He climbed out of the car and fluffed the collar of his old villain costume, Hana's hands displayed on his wrists. He would have preferred to have them on his shoulders, but it was important to make sure that the correctly sized hands were in the correct spots, otherwise the disguise would be ruined. Kazuki raised an eyebrow curiously. How odd. Last I heard, you wore a lot more hands than just those two. Where are the others? Tenko huffed. Lost M when Sensei blew up at Kamino. Only managed to salvage these two before the heroes arrested the League. Hanabata rubbed at his chin. How strange. I would have thought you'd make use of Kurogiri's teleportation abilities to arrive. Why the car? Tenko grunted. When Sensei blew up, Kurogiri's brain stopped working. I would have brought him along to see if your guys could get him going again, but it took all I had to sneak out for this meeting. Managed to get in contact with the underground, found someone who was willing to drive me here. The others are somewhere else, so I couldn't bring M. Kazuki tooted. That's a shame. They would have made such fine recruits. Especially Dabi, oh, he would have been such fun to interview. Tenko huffed. Whatever. You wanted to discuss terms, yeah. So discuss. Hanabata chuckled. Not out here, obviously. Far too many prying eyes. Why don't we negotiate somewhere more private? Tenko grunted. Fine. But you're starting to annoy me. I'm only here because of Jiren, so make this quick. Shouta watched Chimera follow the two others into the city, sighing as the massive gate shut behind the trio. Well, so much for keeping an eye on them. Hisashi nodded and slumped in the driver's seat, running a hand through his hair. So, what do we do now? Do we just wait here for him to get back, or do we go back to UA and wait for him to contact us? Shouta hummed, scanning the area as he thought. His eyes flicked to the top of the gate, and he froze. Hisashi. On the edge of the wall was the unmistakable figure of Todoroki. The teen was in horrible shape, covered with smudges and smears and shaking horribly. Shouta could tell that the boy was about to collapse from exhaustion. Todoroki swayed to the side, before taking another shaky step towards the edge. Hisashi's eyes locked onto the kid's form, and his face went pale. Shit. He's not planning to stay up there. Shouta felt the blood drain from his face as the realization set in. Damn it. Go out there and catch him. Hisashi hummed worriedly. Why can't you use your capture scarf to get him down? Because that would tip off Kazuki and Hanabata that there was a hero in the car with Shimura when he got here. I didn't think to bring civilian clothing. They won't suspect anything if they see the kid get caught by Shimura's driver. Hisashi nodded and was out of the car in a flash, running up to the base of the gate. Just then, Todoroki took another step, this time off the edge of the wall. Shouta's heart leapt into his throat, but he could only sit there and watch as the kid plummeted. It was a good-sized wall, so Todoroki was in free fall for 10 whole seconds. Those were the longest 10 seconds of Shouta's life. Fortunately, Hisashi got under the kid just in time to jump up and catch him safely. Immediately, the blonde ran back towards the car, opening the driver's side rear door and stuffing the kid inside, panting heavily. "What the hell were you thinking, kid?" Todoroki's breathing was slow, labored. He turned his head, and his eyes widened when he saw Shouta sitting there. "Aizawa, sensei." Shouta felt something in his heart crack. The last he knew, Todoroki had considered him a target. An enemy. Now, the kid was so broken that he sounded hopeful at the sight of a face he had once wanted to destroy. "Kid, what the hell happened to you?" Todoroki coughed, then cracked the barest smirk. "Hell, is accurate. I tried to find someone who would help me. Who would take me in. But when they heard that I was quirkless, they all threw me out. All for one, said that one of my classmates was constantly abused and bullied because he was quirkless. I didn't realize just how bad it actually was." Hisashi frowned. "Didn't your sister take you home with her?" Todoroki chuckled weakly. "Where do you think these bruises came from? When father saw me, he beat me, then threw me onto the street and locked me out. All I had were the clothes on my back that Fuyamai gave me." Shouta's heart twisted into knots. "You should have come to UA. We would have helped you." Todoroki scoffed. "Don't make me laugh. I attacked Yayorozu. I tried to kill Midoriya. I injured All Might. Nobody would have been willing to help a fallen villain like me." Hisashi sighed. "That doesn't mean we wouldn't want to help. Sure, maybe they wouldn't be comfortable having you in the same classroom, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve the same compassion as everyone else. I would have been more than willing to put you in my class." Todoroki huffed. "And why would Endeavor allow me to go back to UA as a lowly Gen Ed student? If he found out, he'd demand that I be expelled, or worse." Shouta scoffed. "He could bluster and yell all he wanted, but he doesn't have any say on who attends. And given that he abandoned you, he has no control over your life." Todoroki looked up at him, and Shouta felt his heart unravel slightly as a spark of hope finally glittered in the kid's eyes. "You really mean it? You would be willing to have me back at UA?" Shouta nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're a kid, to Shouta. Villain or hero student, quirk or no quirk, you deserve to have somewhere to stay." Izuku paused as he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. "Boss, I'm gonna need to step out for a bit. Can you keep an eye on Momo's training for a little bit?" The hero nodded. "Go ahead. I've got this situation covered." Izuku nodded his thanks, before stepping out of the gym and pulling his phone out of his pocket, raising an eyebrow at Aizawa-sensei's name on the caller ID. Accepting the call, he raised the phone to his ear. "What's up?" "We found Shouta." Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Quickly moving past his shock, he responded, "Where?" "Sashi and I had dropped off Shimura at his meeting in Daika, and we saw Todoroki on top of the wall around the city. From the way he was walking, I could tell that he was going to walk off the edge, deliberately. Thankfully, Sashi caught the kid and brought him back to the car. Turns out, Shouto got kicked out of his house and has been wandering the country for the past several weeks. Apparently, nobody would help him because he lost his quirk." Izuku winced in sympathy, remembering the quirkless statistics he'd looked up when he was younger. "I'd like to say that I'm surprised, but with my experience, I'm really not. If anything, I'm impressed he lasted this long." "What's the current situation?" "We persuaded him to come back to UA. He'll be in 1C with Sashi. I'm letting you know because Yayorozu is with you, and I want you to update her on the situation. She'll likely need you nearby for emotional support once she finds out." Izuku hummed. "Probably. You're taking this surprisingly well." Izuku sighed. "Sensei, I don't blame him. The way I see it, Endeavor's constant abuse drove Shouto off the deep end. His actions as Terminus were centered around trying to finally get revenge on the bastard who'd controlled his life for so long. He wasn't thinking about how it would affect anyone else, getting back at Endeavor was the only thing that mattered to him. Momo just happened to be the closest person when he snapped, and I just happened to be the first one to run into him at the camp. Aizawa-sensei huffed. Alright. In that case, then bring Yaoyorozu back to UA as soon as you can. You two deserve to talk to him in private. Izuku nodded. Yes, sensei. The hero hung up, and Izuku sighed deeply, letting his arms drop as he leaned against a nearby wall. Well, no use putting it off. He walked over and opened the door of the gym, drawing the attention of everyone inside. Momo? Can I talk to you for a sec? Something's come up at UA. Tenko huffed as Kazuki and Hanabata stopped in front of a door. Finally. Took us long enough to get here. He walked past the two others and opened the door, stepping into a windowless room containing a table with 4 chairs, along with a TV set into the wall opposite the door. Tenko plopped himself down in the solo chair by the door, and his escorts silently took their seats on the other side of the table. You're seriously making me wait even longer? You're not making your case any better. The TV flickered on, and Tenko swore internally as he saw the feet of Jiren tied to a chair, bruised and bloody. The same voice as the phone call announced, "Steady your tongue, Shigaraki, lest we put the broker out of his misery." Tenko huffed. Fine. So, who's the one in charge? The door opened again, and Tenko twisted his head to see a man with a widow's peak and a long nose walk into the room. That would be me. You're a hard man to track down, Shigaraki Tamura. Tenko raised an eyebrow. And who might you be? The man walked around the table and sat in the chair opposite Tenko, in between Kazuki and Hanabata. My name is Yatsubashi Rakia. However, you may call me Redistro. Tenko grunted. Really? If memory serves, Sensei liked to go on about a guy called Distro, back during the dawn of Quirks. Something about a meta liberation army. Redistro smiled wider. Ah, good, you've heard of our organization. Hopefully, that means our negotiations will go more smoothly. Tenko raised an eyebrow again. Huh. Could have sworn Sensei said that the army was wiped out ages ago. Redistro's smirk twitched, and several dark spots appeared on his massive forehead. Yes, well, the Meta Liberation Army was once disbanded, but it has since reinvigorated itself. Our forces number 400,000 strong, and we have the resources to rival Island itself. Tenko huffed. If you're so powerful, why do you need Sensei's stuff? Redistro twitched again, leaning forward and steepling his fingers on the table. You see, Shigaraki, our soldiers are only so powerful. When our goal is to overthrow hero society in one fell swoop, we must have both the numbers and the strength to overpower the entirety of Japan's heroes, including such powerhouses as Mirako and Endeavor. Unfortunately, very few of our soldiers lack that level of power. However, the Nomu produced by All for One are equipped with multiple meta abilities per unit, and are loyal to their last breath. We need them if we wish to accomplish our goal. Tenko grunted. Well, that's all hunky-dory, but you've yet to answer one thing, what do I get out of it? Retrieving the Nomu from storage isn't an easy task, so you're gonna have to make it worth my time if you want me to contribute to your army. Redistro huffed. Haven't you been oppressed by society? Forced to hold back your magnificent power due to pesky laws? Don't you want to use your meta ability freely? Tenko huffed. Shows what you know. I was never really a part of society to begin with. The second my quirk showed up, Sensei was there to take me in. I've never been oppressed or held back by laws. I've been a villain for almost as long as I can remember, so why the hell should I care about laws? So far, you aren't offering anything new. Redistro huffed. Very well, then. If you will not cooperate, then we will simply need to use force. You have a very close connection with this broker, yes. If you do not contribute to our cause, he will be killed. Slowly and painfully. You would not wish that upon him, would you? Tenko scoffed. Jiren? Please. He's only special as long as he's useful to me. If he's dead, big hoop. I lose one method of getting in contact with the underworld. There's thousands of brokers out there, you just have to know how to find them. In fact, if you kill a broker, then no other brokers are going to cut a deal with you. So, to be frank, killing Jiren would be more of a hindrance to you than me. Redistro scowled. You're bluffing. You have his contact information saved in your phone. You have entire conversations with him through text. Clearly, your connection goes deeper than simply broker and client. Tenko crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. Yeah, right. Sure, some brokers and clients get close and interact more often than usual. But that's just good business. Most brokers will stay in contact with their regular customers, because regulars are likely to spread word of the broker's quality, which brings in more customers. However, if a broker is killed, then there's no love lost for the client. Redistro twitched again, and Tenko smirked. Clearly, you're not well versed in how the underground operates. Of course, he was lying through his teeth. Jiren had definitely become more than just a broker to him. For someone who dealt with villains on a regular basis, the man had a surprisingly big heart. But this Redistro apparently didn't know that, and Tenko was going to milk that advantage drier than a mooing pokey. After several agonizing seconds, Redistro slowly started clapping. Well played, Mr. Shigaraki. I truly have no cards to play against you at this point in time. The ball is in your court. What would we have to offer you in order to make it worth your time to assist us? Tenko chuckled internally. Hook, line, and sinker. Izuku glanced back at Momo as the two of them walked through the halls of UA. Are you okay with doing this? He did nearly kill you, after all. Momo shook her head determinedly. I need to do this. I need to talk to him. Izuku sighed. Well, if you're certain. He slid open the door to Yamada-sensei's office, eyes immediately landing on Shoto sitting in a chair by the teacher's desk. You're a sight for sore eyes, Peppermint. The other boy's head shot up, and he went pale at the sight of the two WANA students in the doorway. Yayorozu. But I thought. Momo hummed. For a while, yes. But we found a way. Shoto hung his head in shame. And I suppose you're here to have words with me about what I did, aren't you? The girl strode forward, standing over him. Shoto flinched, only to pause when she gently cupped his head with her hands. No. I could never blame you for what happened on that day. You were under so much stress, I can't bring myself to fault you for snapping the way you did. You were hurt so badly, and the things I said were what caused you to finally lash out. You had so much anger and fear bottled up, it was going to come out eventually. I only have myself to blame for adding to that, even when I knew about what you were going through. Shoto blinked, tears welling in his eyes. But I nearly killed you. I impaled you through the stomach and pinned you against a wall. Why aren't you angry at me for that? Momo smiled softly. Shoto. I've known you for years. Remember that day we first met each other? It was at a Christmas gala. You were a 5-year-old boy, still recovering from the burn over your left eye. I was a 6-year-old girl, desperately trying to strike out from the lifestyle my mother was forcing on me. We had both escaped our parents and fled to the roof of the building. You were sitting against the corner of the fence, sporting those unsightly bandages over your face when I stepped out into the night air. When I asked, you were more than willing to tell me the story. Of how your mother had snapped and poured boiling water over your face. Of how she had immediately tried to ice the burn, but only made it worse when Endeavor roughly pulled her away from you. Of how she had been sent away, and how you couldn't see her. Shoto frowned. But, if you knew, why didn't you tell anyone? Momo hummed. Oh, Shoto. Who would have listened to me? My mother, a firm supporter of Endeavor and his never-ending violence. His sidekicks, who for all I knew would never speak against him. The police, who I had no experience with and would likely doubt a young girl speaking against a top hero. Much like you, I had nobody nearby who I could turn to for help. But, I knew of one possible option, UA. Principal Nedzu's legal team is the best in the nation, possibly in the world. If anyone would be able to remove Endeavor's grip on your family, it would be him. So, I bided my time. I expressed an interest in heroics after seeing Midnight in action. I trained my body, mind, and quirk. I asked my mother to enroll me in the recommendations exam, so that I could be with you during a crucial time. I waited until I had firmly cemented my position as a trusted member of Class 1A. Then, shortly after the midterm exams, I approached the principal. I laid out what you had told me those 10 years prior. I insisted that you had to be removed from Endeavor's care. I firmly stated that I would not accept no for an answer. he was in the process of building a case against your father when the final exams happened. I suppose it is my fault for not mustering the courage to tell you. Xiaotou sniffed, tears running down his face. You, really? All those years, you stuck by me so that you could help. Momo nodded. Of course. Even from a young age, I always had somewhat of a thirst for justice. Perhaps because father tended to read law books to me as bedtime stories. But I never gave up on you, Xiaotou. I never lost sight of my first mission. Even when there was nothing but darkness, only one thing kept me going, making sure that you were saved from that sorry sack of scum. Xiaotou broke down into sobs, and Momo immediately pulled the younger boy into a tight hug, whispering soft words of comfort. Izuku stood back and watched, feeling something constrict in his throat. Chapter 50. Tenko smirked as Ridestro walked him back to the northern gate, Jiren walking behind him. Pleasure doing business with you, Ridestro. The older villain smiled. Likewise, Shigariki-san. You are indeed a master of negotiation. Perhaps my secretary could learn a thing or two from you. Tenko huffed. Let's not go that far. This is strictly a business partnership, all right. Ridestro chuckled. Of course, of course. As the gate opened, the CEO frowned. That's odd. The car is different from the one you arrived in. Tenko frowned and peered at the driver's seat, sighing as he saw 13 sitting behind the wheel in civilian clothing. It's fine, I recognize the driver. She's another of my associates. I imagine something came up that required my original driver to leave. Ridestro chuckled. Ah, the whirlwind of life. Things rarely ever go to plan, don't they? Tenko huffed. Unfortunately. There's always some element of chaos that you can't predict. In any case, I'll be in touch. He took Jiren by the arm with a finger raised, leading the broker over to the car. As he opened the rear door on the passenger side, he glanced over his shoulder to see Ridestro and his two subordinates walking back into the city as the gate closed behind them. Sighing with relief, he closed the rear door and climbed into the front passenger seat, pulling on the offered set of artist's gloves and buckling himself in. So, where's present Mike and Eraserhead? 13 sighed. Apparently, little Xiaotou was in the area. After you entered the city, Hisashi caught the kid right as he stepped off the wall. They've taken him back to UA, and are currently working out his situation. Luckily, I didn't have any classes scheduled for today, so I was able to come in as a replacement driver. I take it your negotiations were successful. Tenko nodded. We've made a deal. I'll retrieve the Nomu for his use. In return, he'll grant me command over them, along with a fifth of his current army. I'm expecting to be in charge of the weaker soldiers, since I bet he trusts me about as much as Stain trusted Sensei. Maybe a little more, actually, considering he didn't have his secretary plant a mic on me. 13 chuckled as she started the car and pulled away from the city. Most likely. Still, to have full command over the Nomus means you're in a perfect position to turn his own strength against him. Tenko grunted. Not entirely. His 4 generals are all strong in their own rights, and he's no pushover himself. If we want to take them down for good, we need to play our cards just right. The heroine sighed. Sounds like you've got a lot to report once we get back. 2 days later. Izuku walked into the gym, stretching his arms up and feeling his spine pop several times in quick succession. How's progress with Momo? Fat Gum glanced over from where he was supervising the girls' training. Well, since the start of the internship, her production time's been cut almost in half, and her lipid requirements are about 2/3 of what they used to be. Not bad, but I'm pretty sure we want to go further. After Momo's rewinding, Aizawa-sensei had contacted Mandalay and retrieved the training schedule for the student. When the internship started, a copy of that schedule had been sent to Fat Gum. In essence, her training was similar to what Izuku underwent during the summer camp, constantly making items while eating. Her objectives were the same, increasing durability and creation speed while decreasing material cost. Several high-calorie treats were set out on the table on her left side, while Matryoshka dolls were continuously popping out of her right arm. As Momo continued scarfing down sweets, Izuku moved over to the weightlifting area of the gym, loading up the bar and starting on his workout schedule. His quirk could give him the muscle memory or heightened senses needed to properly use a given item, but it couldn't directly enhance his physicality, outside of some transformations. As such, he needed to regularly exercise in order to get the hardest impact with any of his physical weapons. Of course, he wasn't entirely neglecting his quirk. He'd established a schedule with defined physical training days, quirk training days, mental training days, and rest days in order to most efficiently train every part of himself. Mental training days usually consisted of homework and other forms of mental stimulation, so as to give his body a break from the strain during the other days. Quirk training days involved much the same of what Momo was doing, cutting down on creation time and lipid cost while simultaneously upgrading durability and inventory slots. He'd gone from 4 equipped slots and 10 inventory slots at the start of the year to 6 equipped slots and 20 inventory slots now. In addition, his quirk evolution had altered the conditions for items to be equipped. Instead of being in contact with his skin, they only had to be within a foot of his body. Then there were those days where he was figuring out the limits for his transformations. Every third quirk training day was set aside to discern what he could or couldn't use. He'd found that transformations retained any requirements from the games they came from. For instance, if he wanted to achieve a state similar to Fire Mario, he'd need to create a fire flower to access it. In addition, transformations took up inventory slots in a similar manner to equipment. The 6-armed Vajrayasura transformation took 2 slots, due to the nature of having extra limbs and being able to fire energy blasts. Also, like with equipment, some transformations were completely out of the question, namely, ones that granted invincibility or required a connection with another being. Unfortunately, he could not use multiple transformations at the same time like he could with items. Fortunately, though, his transformations could accommodate the clothes he wore, which meant there was no need to make him a new outfit that was DNA encoded. While May was happy that she didn't need to completely remake his outfit, she had made a few adjustments. After some experimentation involving his vest's alloy, she'd upgraded it to resist all manner of heat, cold, electricity, and blades. It could now stop a sniper round in its tracks, but anything above that was pushing it. She'd also revolutionized his jumpsuit by making it self-repairing, able to mend any cuts or holes that weren't absorbed by the vest. His boots now contained devices that could take in air and pressurize it, then shoot it out of the solace, giving him a burst of speed either horizontally or vertically. She'd pitched the idea of adding grappling hooks to his gloves, but he was quick to point out that he basically had any mobility aids covered by his inventory or his natural abilities. Much pouting was had. Izuku squatted low, feeling the heavy bar dig into his shoulders and upper back. Crazy to think how, just a year ago, this would have been totally unbelievable. It's nuts just how far I've come and how much I've accomplished in such a short time. And there's no telling what I have yet to do, either. Katsuki lunged, slamming his fist into the punching bag and sending it flying off its hook. The bag smacked into the wall of Gym Alpha, leaving a sizable dent and leaking stuffing. Grunting, Katsuki walked over to the pile of bags on the floor and picked up a fresh one, securing it to the hook and taking up a boxer's stance once more. More control. You need to deliver the most force while causing the least amount of internal damage. It won't do you any good if you punch a villain and cause his stomach to collapse in on itself. The sound of the gym door caught his attention, and he glanced over as Riot walked in, a punching bag slung over his shoulder. His classmate glanced over at him in surprise. "Oh, hey bro. Didn't think I'd find you here. Figured you'd be in ground beta working on your quirk." Katsuki grunted and turned back to his own bag, delivering a couple quick strikes before dancing back. "My quirk can only do so much. I can't rush into every situation thinking I'll be able to blast my way out of it. You never know when you'll have to fight someone like Eraserhead who can disable your quirk." He shot forward, delivering a thundering roundhouse kick that sent the bag swinging. Riot hummed in understanding. "Makes sense, especially if you can't use your quirk forever. If somebody's able to outlast it, you've gotta have another tool in your kit in order to win." The redhead walked over to a free hook and set up his punching bag, immediately falling into a boxer's stance. The two of them worked in silence for a little while, until a mighty blow sent Katsuki's bag flying into the wall, spilling its stuffing over the floor. Again. Riot paused in his workout as Katsuki groaned and walked over to his pile of bags on the floor. "I really wanna figure out how I can get my punches to deal knockback without too much actual damage." Riot hummed briefly. "Well, you're more likely to figure it out against another person than if you just wail on punching bags for hours. Wanna spar?" Katsuki grunted. "Why the hell not?" Okako rolled in a half circle, dodging her opponent's strike. She quickly wrapped her arms around the other fighter's waist and bent backwards, roaring as she delivered a perfect suplex. A gong rang, and she backed away from her opponent, feeling her heart rate settle. Phew. That's one of the toughest fights I've had in a while. Tsu rolled backwards, planting her hands on the floor and springing to her feet. You said it, Kuro. You're a really tough opponent. Ryukyu walked forwards from the sidelines, clapping her hands slowly. Marvelous work, you two. I doubt any of my regular sidekicks would be able to keep up with either of you, save for Nejire-chan. You've improved drastically since the week began. The two girls stood upright and bowed deeply. Thank you for your help, Ryukyu-sama. The heroine chuckled lightly. It's the least I could do. Especially after the wonderful renovation to the agency before the hero rankings. Okako placed her hands on her lower back and bent backwards, feeling her vertebrae pop in quick succession. Where is Nejire-senpai, anyway? I haven't seen her around the agency much recently. Ryukyu hummed. I believe she's taken up training with her friends, Amajiki and Togata. If memory serves, she mentioned that UA has been pushing the third years in the hero course quite hard recently. My guess is that they're preparing themselves, much like the two of you are doing. Okako and Tsu exchanged glances. They'd heard that the Meta Liberation Army had reformed and was building up its resources from Daika City, and that UA was planning to face them once the army made its first move. But to realize that every year was being pushed to improve, it really set things in perspective. This wasn't just a simple villain attack or criminal organization, this was an all-out war. Hitachi grunted as he ducked under Dad's punch, immediately sweeping the hero's legs out from under him. To his credit, Dad landed on his hand and sprung off, nimbly darting back in with a blade kick. Hitachi sidestepped, before wrapping his capture scarf around the extended leg and pulling. Dad went down, and Hitachi pressed his advantage, binding the hero's arms to his sides and pressing his foot into his adoptive father's back. Pops blew a whistle, and Hitachi stepped back, letting his capture scarf unravel and settle on his shoulders. That's my first win against you, isn't it? Dad stood up and walked over, gently laying a hand on Hitachi's shoulder. It is indeed. Good work, kiddo. You've come far from the scared kid we picked up from that orphanage. Hitachi's chest swelled with pride. Thanks, Dad. Pops nodded, his expression unusually grim. Unfortunately, we can't stop there. I hate to say it, Bud, but we can't take any chances with what's coming, so you've gotta keep working at it. Hitachi nodded. Right. He and Dad walked back to their respective starting positions in the ring, drawn on the ground in the middle of Gym Epsilon. They crouched slightly in unison, ready and waiting for Pops to give the signal to begin. Come on, Hitachi. You can do better. You can be better. You can be a hero. Yuga winced as he felt the backlash from naval laser clench his stomach. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pausing, he pulled it out and glanced at the caller ID, immediately paling. Quickly recomposing himself, he glanced at where Ectoplasm Sensei and Cementos Sensei were busy helping Sato-kun. He darted out of Gym Gamma and made his way to a spot that he knew was out of view of the cameras, opening his phone and accepting the call. Oui, monsieur. The doctor's voice grumbled, I hope you haven't forgotten our agreement, boy. Yuga swallowed. Of course, doctor. I have given you any information I can get my hands on. Unfortunately, Director Nedzu is being especially secretive right now, and I am unaware of just what his plans entail. The doctor sighed. I see. And what of Shigaraki? Yuga swallowed again. He is still living in the dorms with 1A, still acting as though he has renounced the league. I assure you, his cover remains unbroken. Good. See to it that you remind that brat just what he owes master. The doctor hung up, and Yuga let out a sigh of relief, slumping against the wall and sitting on the floor. He hung his head, tears welling in his eyes. Momir. Mon père. I promise that I will free you from your chains one day. I just pray that I am able to muster the courage to do so before my lies return to strike me in the rear. He was already on edge by lying to UA's faculty about his family and his quirk. But to lie to the doctor about Shimura's allegiance. Utterly unthinkable. Kyude let his hand drop, sighing. He spun in his office chair to gaze out over the rows of inactive Nomas, suspended in their tanks and waiting to be unleashed. Oh, my beautiful children. Soon. Soon, you will be free to wreak havoc and destruction upon the world as you so desire. I promise. Suddenly, a different phone rang, and Coyote glanced over at it, eyes going wide as he recognized it as a call from Shigaraki. He eagerly accepted the call, nearly bouncing in his seat with anticipation. The young man's voice grumbled out, "Oi, Doc. I found some people who might be able to help your Noma cause the chaos you're hoping for. Interested?" Coyote giggled excitedly. "Of course, young master. Please, tell me more." He glanced back at the 6 high-ends in their tanks, placed close to his desk. He barely registered Shigaraki's words as he lost himself to fantasies of watching his children raise a path from the lab to Tokyo, leaving death and destruction in their wake. "Oh, how beautiful it will be. How I long to repay this wretched world for taking master from me." Nezu glanced up from his computer as Shimura walked into his office, hanging up his phone and stuffing it in his pocket. "I take it the doctor has been informed of your plans." Shimura nodded, sighing. "I overheard him talking to some of the inactive Nomas on his end. He's gone off the deep end, he just wants to destroy the world to get revenge for all for one's death." Nezu hummed. "Noted. And what of his mole?" Shimura's expression turned pained. "The kid's a nervous wreck. He's living so many double lives, he's starting to lose track of who he is at heart. We'd better make things right, and fast." Nezu nodded, mentally seething. How dare this foolish human hurt one of his precious students? Chizome stepped out of the building, wiping the blood from his serrated katana before slipping it back in its sheath. He glanced up at the night sky, grunting when he saw that one of the new spotlights was heading his way. He darted off, prying open a manhole cover and dropping into the sewer system before he could be discovered. That was closer than last night. They're getting more vigilant. Good. The deaths will make them more nervous, which will serve us well in the coming battle. His earpiece buzzed, and he brought a finger up to it to accept the call. Nezu chirped, "Good evening, Akaguro-san. How goes progress on your end?" Chizome huffed. "Decently. I have worked my way up to taking out entire buildings of soldiers each night. However, my windows of opportunity grow ever smaller. I do hope that this will not go on for much longer." The mammal chuckled. "Well, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that one of my endeavors has moved up the army's timetable. They plan to move within the month. I wish you the best of luck in your future nightly efforts." The line went dead, and Chizome grunted warmly. "To you as well, I suppose." 3 weeks later, Izuku stood at the edge of the hill, gazing down at Daika City and its heavy fortifications. Crazy that the place was holding an insurrectionist army the entire time. And here I used to think that it was just the headquarters for Ditnerat. Katsuki grunted, standing on Izuku's right. "Insurrectionists, support company, whatever. Point is, we're gonna kick their asses." Momo nodded, standing to Izuku's left. Izuku kinda wished that her lack of a provisional license would have kept her back at UA, but the HPSC had basically ordered Nezu to put the entire class on the front lines, much to the mammal's chagrin. "Indeed. We have trained as hard as possible in these past few weeks. If we do not emerge victorious, then Izawa-sensei will be terribly cross with us for slacking off." The class chuckled from where they were gathered back in the forest, but it was laced with apprehension. They'd known that this was coming for weeks now, but it didn't change how huge this was. This was full-scale war, something that nobody could ever be fully prepared for. Any sane person would be terrified at the prospect of fighting for their life. Of course, one could argue that 1A was anything but sane. Izuku turned on his heel, a massive grin spreading across his face. "All right, 1A. Today, we take our greatest step forward. Today, we are not students, nor children, nor civilians. Today, we are heroes. And heroes don't fall to anything short of total annihilation." A resounding roar went up, and Izuku felt his chest swell with pride. "This is my family. My brothers and sisters in arms. We cannot die here. We are the heralds of the future. We will fight, and we will win. For we are the next generation of heroes. We are Class 1A. Chapter 51. Redistro stared out the massive window behind his desk, gazing over the city that had been his home for so long. A shame that it must be destroyed, but the collateral damage from the coming battle is inevitable. Still, we will hopefully have enough funds and resources to rebuild once this war is over. He turned on his heel and placed his arms behind his back, scanning the faces of his 5 generals. Curious, pen and paper in hand as always. Trumpet, slicking his hair back and straightening his tie. Skeptic, tapping away at his laptop and making final preparations. Getten, his power frosting over his breath and his arms. Shigaraki, with his intimidating aura in contrast with his casual wear. My friends, the time has come. We shall shed our illusion of peace and rise up against the laws that have oppressed us for far too long. We shall strike back and create a world in which we are truly free. Shigaraki grunted. You said it, boss. I'll take my squadron and head for the southern gate. Intel says that's where the heroes are focusing their less experienced fighters. Curious squealed with excitement. Oh, it's so thrilling to finally be here. Victory and liberation are within our grasp. Trumpet smirked and cleared his throat. I will assemble my forces and move for the eastern exit. I believe Jiren informed us that the enemy will place their weaker heroes there, and I am best suited to handle them. Curious, I expect you to join me eventually. Getten chuckled, frost spreading over his right arm. I will head for the northern gate. It'll be a battle of power, strength against strength. What a glorious sight it will be. Redistro smiled warmly. I will remain here for the time being. If any of you feel you are somehow outmatched, you need only call. I will come with utmost speed and provide my assistance. He raised his hand to his forehead, placing his thumb on his skin and extending his pointer finger upwards. For the liberation of meta abilities. Nobaja glanced up as the door to the barracks hissed open, Shigaraki stepping through and drawing their attention. It's time. We're heading for the southern gate. Keep a level head, and remember your training. Nobaja smirked, filled with confidence. I can't wait to show that prick Bakugo just how much better I've gotten. And who knows, maybe I'll finally get another chance to show Deku his proper place again. He glanced around the room, noting that everyone else bore uneasy expressions. He stood up and thumped his chest a couple times, drawing the army's attention. Come on, guys. Let's show these so-called heroes just who's stronger. A collective roar rose up from the throats of the soldiers, and the huge bay doors at the back of the room hissed, slowly opening and letting daylight stream into the giant room. Nobaja's grin widened as he began to march forward. Showtime, assholes. Rumi cracked her knuckles, looking down at the city below. As the streets came to life with roaring people, she glanced back at the squadron of top heroes that had joined her. All right, slowpokes. Let's see if you can keep up. She bounced twice on the balls of her feet, before tensing her legs and springing forward. She soared into the air, eyes locked onto the gate at the northern edge of the city. Showtime, motherfuckers. Shouta glanced to his right as Hisashi walked up next to him. You alright? His husband sighed nervously. I can't help but worry about the kids. It's one thing to prepare them to be heroes and fight villains day in and day out, but it's another to send them off to war before they're 20. And Yayorozu doesn't even have a provisional license yet. Shouta laid a hand over Hisashi's shoulder, and the blonde glanced over at him. It's alright. They've got Midoriya to lead them. Hisashi raised an eyebrow curiously. You've sure got a lot of trust in Midoriya, don't you? Shouta chuckled and returned his gaze to the city below. I've seen the way he interacts with the others. They're more than just a class, they're a family. Midoriya would rather die than let his family get hurt. And it takes a lot to kill him. The communicator in his ear dinged, and he straightened, unraveling his capture scarf from his neck. There's the signal. It's go time. He stuck his arm up, drawing the attention of the force of low-ranked and underground heroes behind him. He brought his arm forward, and they took off as one, bounding between the trees and emerging from the forest over Daika City. Showtime. Izuku paused as his comm system pinged. Thrusting his fist up, he shouted, 1A, to action. Plus Ultra. The class roared the school motto in unison and charged out of the treeline, angling straight for the southern gate of Daika. The gate fell outward, crashing to the ground as the massive army behind it surged out from the city's walls. Izuku felt a manic grin spread across his face, and he leapt into the air, flinging his arms to the side. There was a flash of green light, and Izuku's eyes blazed behind the wooden mask of the masked hammer ability. Twin wooden hammers flared in his hands, and his signature extreme gear hummed under his feet. The two sides clashed, and the area immediately devolved into chaos. The class was quickly split up, and due to the sheer difference in size, each member was quickly surrounded by several units from the opposing army. Of course, what they lacked in numbers, they more than made up for in skill and raw power output. Each of them had a specific skill set, and were ordered to prioritize that skill set to the fullest. Yuga hung back and bombarded the enemy with a barrage of lasers, minimizing the individual backlash to maximize his overall output. Mina danced around her opponents, covering them with acid that had low acidity and high viscosity, sticking them to the ground and trapping them in place. Tsu bounced from head to head, taking down enemy soldiers one by one. Tinya was an uncontested blur, charging through the enemy horde and sending entire swaths of people flying. Okako was an utter monster, toting around massive iron balls on the ends of chains that, when affected by her quirk, were trivial to swing but still hit like trucks. Mashirao beat down the enemy one opponent at a time, moving from person to person with insane efficiency. Denki simply waded through hordes of opponents, shrouded in an aura of electricity that knocked anyone nearby unconscious. Ajiro was an unstoppable force, bowling through swaths of enemies and tanking every hit thrown his way. Kauji was the strike operator, directing his own personal army of animals to annihilate, but not kill, entire platoons of enemy soldiers, as well as calling out positions to his classmates. Rikido had a simple task: utterly demolish anyone in his way. The simplicity of his particular order meant that he could carry it out even under the mind-dulling effects of his quirk. Mezu led recon, acting as several pairs of eyes and ears, while also defending Kauta if an opponent got a little too close for comfort. Kyuka had a dual role, listening for patterns and positions while going apeshit with her soundboxing style. Hanta darted around the battlefield, tying up opponents for his classmates to handle or snagging any flying soldiers out of the air. Fumikage simply waded through the enemy forces in his avatar of Tsukuyomi, tossing entire squadrons around like ragdolls. Yoarashi bowled aside swaths of enemy soldiers with intense gales, occasionally picking up an opponent and flinging them into several of their buddies. Toru acted as a simultaneous scout and assassin, silently observing enemy positions and flitting in to take out key figures from the shadows with no warning. Katsuki, of course, was an absolute demon, blasting apart clumps of soldiers with massive explosions. Hitachi supported where he could by either hypnotizing soldiers with his quirk or tying up groups of enemies with his capture scarf. Momo stood back and blasted apart enemy platoons with a pair of cannons that she could constantly reload and fire on a whim. Shirakumo darted in and out of the battlefield on a yellow cloud, moving too fast for any of the soldiers to react. As for Izuku, his job was simple: handle the enemy's big guns. As he flew over the battlefield on his extreme gear, Izuku could hear a low rumbling that was steadily growing louder. The enemy forces began laughing, and a hole in the city's wall exploded, with several massive figures emerging from the breach. Nomua. Izuku glanced up at the top of the wall, where he could see Tenko overlooking the chaos. The villain met his gaze, and they nodded in unison. Tenko shouted, "Nomua! Attack the green one!" Immediately, the beasts zeroed in on Izuku, and the hero in training grinned maniacally. "You want some? Then come get some." Several Nomua with wings screeched and took off, streaking through the air towards him. Izuku's grin widened, and he shot forward. Blazing wood met embalmed skin, and the air exploded. Izuku soared skyward, his extreme gear dissipating. As the Nomua flew up towards him, he spun, his hammers igniting and burning holes through their fragile patagia. The second he landed, the ground-bound Nomua charged forward, ignoring the cries of their compatriots. Izuku dropped his masked hammer and equipped the Ember Celica, the yellow gauntlets whirring to life in an instant. He crouched low and shouted, "Come on!" His fists blurred, unleashing a massive chain of explosions that repelled the oncoming monsters. Izuku cocked his right fist and punched at the ground, kicking up a massive shower of dirt. When it fell back down, the boy was gone. The Nomua glanced around in confusion, only for a green blur to zip through their ranks. It skidded to a stop on the disrupted ground, and the Nomua all fell in unison, identical stab wounds on their spines marking them for death. Izuku casually spun the black rose butterfly knife in his hand, dancing back and forth on Lucio's roller blades. Had enough yet, or do we need to get serious? Suddenly, something wrapped around his waist and lifted him skyward, before slamming him into the earth. His training kicked in, and he nimbly rolled backwards to avoid 5 long fingers scratching at him. Izuku sprung to his feet, lacking any weapons but not lacking determination. He paused, taking in the features of the person before him. The enemy soldier laughed maniacally, brandishing his 10 elongated fingers, each one an impressive 3 meters long. What do you think, hero? Is my meta ability suited for heroism now? Izuku grunted, settling into a defensive stance. Just my luck. Because of course I had to run into you of all people here. Yobino Baju laughed, his fingers twitching wildly. Your luck's run out, hero brat. Of course, I can't say you were very lucky to begin with, Deku. Katsuki froze as one word echoed across the battlefield. A word he never thought he'd hear used again. Not in a million years. Snarling, he resumed his onslaught with renewed interest, his explosions fueled by his rage. God. Fucking. Damn it. Izuku stared at his former classmate, gazing up at the other boy's inhumanly long fingers. Yobi cackled, waving his hands wildly. You like them? I put a lot of work into getting them this long. Not that you or anyone else ever got the chance to see it. If only Aldera hadn't been so busy working on Bakugo, maybe I would have had my chance to really shine. But no, everyone else there was just an ass-kisser to some random chump who just happened to have a flashy quirk. The most recognition I ever got in that hellhole was showing you your place. Well, guess what? Now I'll get the whole world's recognition by, you guessed it, putting you in your place, 6 feet under. Yobi's fingers curled into claws, which was a disturbing sight at that length. His hands tensed, and the massive claws swiped downwards at Izuku's prone form. At the last second, he jumped back, and Yobi's fingers dug into the earth. Yobi cackled madly and pulled his hand out, swiping them from side to side as he ran forward. Izuku backpedaled rapidly, ducking and weaving around the other boy's clumsy strikes. The sounds of explosions in the distance grew louder, a sign that Katsuki was approaching. But at this rate, the blonde wouldn't make it in time. Yobi laughed, lashing out once again. Isn't this familiar, Deku? It's been too long since somebody put you in your place. You've grown soft, being at UA where nobody was honest. Everybody lied to you, telling you that you had the right to stand among the best of the best. They were wrong. You don't deserve to lick the ground I walk on. I'm above you, Deku, and you know it. That's life. Dekus are stepping stones for those with potential to rise to greatness. Now accept your fate and fertilize the ground that will lift me to new heights. His hand swiped down, and Izuku didn't dodge. The fingers caught him, and there was a massive thud as the giant hand slammed into the earth. Everyone nearby froze and turned to stare. Yobi cackled madly and leaned back, roaring to the heavens. Do you see me, Aldera? I know Baju, am more than you could have ever imagined. You failed to recognize me for what I am, and that was your downfall. This Deku will be the first corpse lining my red carpet of fame, fortune, and victory. He continued cackling madly, only to pause when the ground rumbled. The earth shuddered, and the dirt around Yobi's buried fingers began to tremble. Suddenly, a shower of dirt burst into the sky, right from between his index and middle fingers. Said fingers were suddenly forced backwards, much farther back than they were intended to go. Yobi shrieked in pain, which only grew in intensity when both fingers emitted a loud and painful snap. When the dirt settled, Izuku was standing there, visibly bereft of any weapons or items. His hands were each gripping one of Yobi's fingers. You know, Yobi, one thing I noticed back in elementary school is that, when your fingers stretch, they become more brittle. Naturally, the farther they stretch, the more fragile they get. I'm almost certain I tried telling you that. Oh, but wait, you were too busy leaving scratches across my face with your deliberately long fingernails. His grip tightened, and the bones in Yobi's fingers shattered. The boy shrieked even louder, and his remaining fingers shrunk down to their normal size. However, the broken fingers remained elongated, much to the surprise of everyone else present. Izuku casually walked forward, striding up to stand a couple feet from Yobi. The shorter boy glared at the hero student. So you exploited a momentary weakness. Big hoop. You're still the weak, useless Deku that you'll always be. Nothing will change that. Izuku tilted his head and grinned fearfully. I wonder about that. He lunged forward, stamping his right foot into the ground. His fist came forward, slamming into Yobi's face. With Izuku's lean muscle and small build, this normally would be a relatively weak punch. However, this blow carried all the weight from the years of bullying, the years of trauma that had built up during his elementary schooling. the weight that only a victim of intense abuse would be able to deliver. Yubi's face crumpled around Izuku's fist. The MLA soldier was lifted off the ground and sent flying through the air, crashing into the wall of Daika City. Several of the surrounding soldiers flinched as Yubi's body slammed into the metal, leaving an impact crater several meters in diameter. Izuku stepped back and shook his fist, feeling the recoil from the titanic blow he had just delivered. That was fucking cathartic, bitch. Shouda's head whipped up at the sound of grinding metal coming from the southern side of the city. What the hell was that? Anima, come in. What's going on over there? The student's voice quickly came over the comms. Izuku ran into a former classmate from Aldera. He proceeded to air his frustrations onto said former classmate's face. Yubi, I think was his name, was sent flying into the wall, leaving a sizable crater. The noise you heard was probably the metal bending from the impact. Shouda gave a quick sigh of relief, before quickly snagging an enemy soldier with his capture scarf and flinging them into a group of other combatants. Alright. Keep me posted if anything comes up. Roger that, Eraserhead. Redistro frowned as he noticed the large dent in the southern wall. Skeptic. What happened at the southern gate? The younger man tapped away at his computer, before grunting. Remember the recruit who was encouraging his fellows to train? It appears he deliberately sought out save point, believing himself to be stronger than the boy. The price for his hubris was a punch to the face that sent him flying into the wall, leaving the dent you're seeing now. Redistro hummed in surprise. Save point must possess incredible strength to cause such a large crater with an opponent's body, and from several meters away. How is the situation over there? Skeptic winced. Not good, sir. Our forces are losing their will to fight after seeing arguably their strongest member be taken down so easily and with such force. In addition, every last one of our nomas have been slain. Shigaraki tried to use them to overwhelm save point, but they were destroyed in short order. Redistro sighed. Then it appears that we have a weak link. Our southern flank is undoubtedly our most vulnerable at the moment. A pity, I had hoped that I would not need to use my meta ability against children, but so be it. Skeptic glanced up, the worry in his eyes visible through the bangs over his face. Sir? You can't actually be thinking of using up your stress so soon, are you? Why not ask Getten to send some of his soldiers to assist? Or ask Curious to lend a hand? Or get Trumpet to direct his forces there? Or I could send out my puppets to assist. There's no need for you to risk yourself, sir. Redistro slowly turned to face his subordinate, and Skeptic swallowed nervously at the spreading purple spots on the Grand Commander's face. My dear comrade. The students of UA have already proved themselves a force to be reckoned with. We must make sure they are taken out of play if we are to be victorious. Besides, all the others are currently occupied with the attacking heroes, and cannot spare any soldiers of their own. No, I must handle this myself. Chapter 52. Izuku led Class 1A through Daika City. Glancing around, the place looked deserted, with barely any signs of the once massive population that inhabited the buildings around them. Man, this is eerie. It's like a giant ghost town. Remind me again why we had to take everyone down before coming inside? We probably could have forced the fighting back through the gate or something. Katsuki grunted. If we did that, we'd be open to an attack from behind. For all we know, they could have left some troops behind to ambush us if we got inside the city. Momo nodded. Exactly. By defeating or subduing every member outside before entering, we're able to direct all of our focus to watching for surprise attacks, rather than diverting some of our attention to the fighting we brought in. Okako huffed. That, and doing it this way means less collateral damage, which means less stuff to rebuild once this is all over. The government's not gonna let this place just go unused after the melee's been driven out of it. The fewer things they have to rebuild, the lower the cost of rebuilding will be. And who do you think will pay for the reconstruction? Izuku grunted. Fair enough. I'm just creeped out by how silent it is. Yuga shuddered. Indeed, monsieur. It is most unsettling. Suddenly, the nearest building exploded, and a black blur slammed into Izuku, carrying him through the streets and ramming him into another building. As he dropped to the ground, coughing, the blur that had tackled him backed off, revealing itself to be a thin, wiry, black Nomua. With the inflated muscles in its legs and its quickly darting eyes, it was clear the thing was built for speed. Clapping could be heard from the remains of the building the Nomu had emerged from, and 1A's attention swiveled to the wreckage as a short man in a lab coat walked out. Truly magnificent, say point. I knew this child would need to be the cream of the crop to catch you by surprise, but the fact that you only took minimal damage from the impact shows just how incredible you are. Izuku's eyes narrowed. You must be the doctor. The doctor tilted his head curiously. Oh? And where did you hear about me? Katsuki grunted. The teachers grilled Shiggy for as much info as they could get. Then they told us that info, just in case we ran into the remnants of the League again. It was the lie that Eraserhead had cooked up for them, so as to protect Tenko's true allegiance for as long as possible. The doctor sighed in disappointment. What a shame. How could Tamura have fallen to the enemy so easily? Still, I suppose you didn't keep as close a watch on him as you should have, given he was able to get away for long enough to meet these wonderful people. Oh, the Nomu I could make with their quirks. They would be magnificent. He scowled. At least, they would be if Master hadn't been taken from me. Do you even realize how vital he was to the process of creating Nomu? You can't just force multiple quirks into a single body without some method of removing quirks in the first place. Izuku said nothing, his mind whirling. He's gone off the deep end. All he cares about is avenging All for One. So of course I'd be his first target, being the one who killed the bastard. He said that this Nomu was built specifically to counter me, much like how the one at the USJ was designed to beat All Might. My guess is that he's relying on overcoming my speed, since that's the greatest strength of mine that I've displayed. Given how often I use my extreme gear, it's not a bad guess. Kinda wondering how he altered it to counter me after All for One died, though. The Nomu standing close to Izuku rumbled, Father, may I dispatch him now? The doctor sighed. In due time, Hunter, in due time. I want this brat to know exactly why he's suffering before the light leaves his eyes. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked forward. 1A tensed, only to back off when Izuku snapped his fingers. They parted before the old man, allowing him to walk over to where Izuku was getting to his feet. Do you know what my master's great vision was? Izuku coughed into his fist. Something about conquering the world, I'd imagine. He seemed like the world-conquering type. The doctor huffed warmly. Yes. His wish was to rule the world. I suppose none of you are old enough to know what it was like during the early years of quirks. Allow me to enlighten you, then. In those times, the world was ruled by fear and chaos. People went mad, driven to their basest instincts by the emergence of something beyond their meager knowledge. Governments held no power, and politicians had no sway. In this time of darkness, the world needed a beacon of light to direct them. And Master wanted to be that. He would gather everyone under his rule, give them direction and purpose. And he did. Oh, it was glorious to see how Japan prospered under his rule. But then, those annoying heroes took root. They looked at Master's prosperity and called it tyranny. They bit the hand that fed them, and they eventually grew strong enough to unseat Master from his throne. It was a dark day indeed when his empire fell. We would have taken it back, you know. Brought Japan to order before moving to the rest of the world. Master would have begun his crusade to save the world from itself once All Might was out of the way. But then, you just had to show up and ruin everything. You appeared from nowhere and took Master from me with nary a care. And Japan dares to celebrate you and your kind for slaying the king of evil. I won't stand for it. The doctor glared at Izuku. You will be the first to die, followed by the rest of you. Your corpses will hang from the walls of the city as a warning to those who would stand in the way of Master's vision. And when this is over, Tamura will rule Japan in Master's stead. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and the Nomu exploded in a shower of blood and viscera. Katsuki raised his palms, and an enormous explosion incinerated what remained of the monster. Izuku brought the classic up to his face and blew out the smoke rising from the barrel. The thing about monologues. They leave you wide open. The doctor stared blankly at where Hunter had once stood, his jaw slack. But I designed him to be a perfect counter to your abilities. Izuku dropped the rifle and stood upright, towering over the doctor. Lesson 1 of dealing with UA students, never assume you know exactly what they can do. He crouched down to stare the quivering man in the eyes. But then, you've always been underestimating me, Dr. Tsubasa. The doctor frowned. Tsubasa, Tsubasa. That was the name I used at Musudafu General Hospital. Were you one of my patients back then? Izuku grinned. Indeed I was. Remember me, doctor? The little boy with green hair who you claimed was quirkless. The man's eyes widened. You. The boy whose mother could levitate objects and whose father breathed fire. But you were quirkless. You didn't show any signs of potentially developing a quirk. How? Izuku's grin widened. And you call yourself a quirk doctor? For shame, sir. You entirely discounted the possibility that my quirk required something else to activate. And indeed, it did. Though, I guess I have to thank you. If you hadn't diagnosed me as quirkless, my life wouldn't have turned out the way it did. If I'd known about my quirk the whole time, perhaps Aldera wouldn't have been shut down. Perhaps Katsuki would have been my friend the whole time. Perhaps I wouldn't have met my best friends until I entered UA. So, I must thank you. You're responsible for my life turning out the way it did, and suffering in that hellhole for 8 years was a small price to pay for the happiness I've experienced as a result of it. Suddenly, something very large crashed into the pavement a few meters away from the assembly. The doctor squeaked in fear and fell to his knees, quickly crawling across the ground and hiding behind Izuku. A voice rang out, "So, doctor, you are responsible for this outcome? You are responsible for the loss of our primary indoctrination facilities? You are the reason we lost the chance at recruiting 2 incredible meta abilities into our ranks." Izuku grunted. "I'm honored, Yatsubashi Rakia. To think that the Grand Commander himself would bother with us puny students." The dust settled, and the CEO of Ditnerat climbed out of the newly formed crater in the ground, swelled to massive proportions and his entire body painted black. His suit was stretched as far as it could go, the fibers straining against the man's skin. Redistro flexed, and the top half of his suit ripped apart, exposing his darkened flesh to the air. "Doctor, you will pay for robbing us of 2 promising soldiers, and for bringing the enemy down on our heads." Izuku grabbed the doctor by the arm and dragged him out from his hiding spot, before kicking him across the ground to land in front of the seething giant. "By all means. Punt him across the Pacific if you want." Redistro stepped forward, and the doctor's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates as the giant got closer. "Please, spare me." The Grand Commander glared down at the old man before him, and drew one massive leg back. "Mercy does not extend to fools like you." The leg swung forward, and the doctor shrieked in pain as he was catapulted through the air, over the city's walls, and beyond the horizon. Izuku stuck both hands in the air and shouted, "And it's good. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a new record for the longest field goal in NFL history." Redistro huffed, staring down the 20 students in front of him. "Just all you like. You stand in the way of our goal, and so you must be eliminated. Do not attempt to negotiate." Izuku sighed, before cracking his knuckles and staring up at the titan in front of him. "Fine, then. Bring it, you Doofenshmirtz knockoff." Toshinori went pale as he saw that young Midoriya and his class were facing off against the Grand Commander of the opposing army. "Are you sure we don't need to send anyone to assist them, sir?" Netsu hummed and sipped at his tea as he scanned the various monitors in front of him. "It would appear that our other forces are currently occupied with the bulk of the army. The faction of top heroes in particular is evenly matched with their opponents. Still, I don't think there's much need to worry. Class 1A is as capable as they come, young Midoriya in particular. Besides, we still have an ace up our sleeve." Toshinori hummed as he glanced at the screen depicting Class 1A and the hulking giant that was Redistro. "If you say so, sir." Shouta paused, holding a hand up to his communicator. "You said you're facing who now?" Kauji responded, "We are currently facing Redistro. At the moment, he has not yet made a move to attack us, but that position won't hold for long. At the moment, it's a face-off, looking to see who will make the first move. If it looks like we're in trouble, I'll call for backup immediately." Shouta glanced over at Hisashi, who was looking at him nervously. The blonde nodded, and Shouta sighed. "These kids are going to be the death of me." "Fine. But notify me as soon as you think you might need help." Kauji chuckled warmly. "Of course, sensei. We know by now not to go up against someone who's clearly out of our league." The line went dead, and a loud boom resonated from the south side of the city. Shouta felt a few more hairs turn gray, and he refocused his attention on the forces blocking his path to the gate. "You'd better survive, Hellspawn. I still need to see you graduate. Rumi glanced up nervously as black energy exploded upwards from the southern part of the city. Come on, kids. You'd better not get your asses killed before you even make it into the rankings. I've still gotta see someone try and take the number 1 spot from me. Hawks flew down next to her, expression worried. Here's hoping that my chick's alright. Can't have him dead before he even leaves the nest. Ed Shot appeared out of nowhere and huffed. You worry too much. Keep in mind, these kids managed to take down All for One himself. More importantly, I'm having issues taking down the guy in charge. He keeps throwing up ice walls too thick for me to get through. Rumi grunted. Alright, fine. If you little ones need the big bad Mirako to do your work for you. Ed Shot scoffed. Just give me an opening. Izuku coughed into his fist, surprised at the blood that landed on his gloves. Damn, that hurts. Redistro stepped forward, the earth shuddering under his weight. Surrender. You clearly have no chance of standing up to me yourselves, and my forces have the other heroes occupied. You cannot win. Izuku coughed again and slowly got up, kneeling on the ground. You know, you say that, and yet you've barely made a dent in our actual forces. Redistro huffed, spreading his arms wide. Are you mad? Look around you. Your classmates have all fallen to my stress output burden. You are alone. Indeed, the bodies of Izuku's class lay sprawled around the area. Katsuki was laying on his back only a couple feet from Izuku, his eyes lifeless. Okako's body had slammed into a building, leaving sizable cracks. Momo was pinned to a wall by a piece of rebar through her chest, her body hanging limp. It looked as though Izuku was the only surviving student. And yet, Izuku chuckled. Honestly, it's incredible how gullible some people can be. The area shimmered, and the bloody tableau was blown away as though it was a sheet of mist. Suddenly, Redistro was surrounded on all sides by a small army of students. Seijin, CA, Katsubutsu, Shikatsu, and most important of all, UA. 1A stood protectively in front of Izuku, looking as healthy as ever, and 1B was crouched on the rooftop above and behind him. Oboro stood with 1A, sheets of black mist swirling around his hands. Ineza grinned widely and tossed a thumbs up in the direction of the Shikatsu students. Nice work, senpai. Utsushimi Kami gave a thumbs up in response. No problem. Redistro glanced around, eyes widening. What? Impossible. How did all of these gnats get here without our noticing? Izuku grinned and slowly climbed to his feet, Kyuka helping him up. Utsushimi Kami, Shikatsu 2 Alpha. Quirk, Glamour. Allows the user to create illusions. The scale of the illusions is dependent on how much mist the user exhales, and can be large enough to cover multiple city blocks. They aren't solid, but they're plenty convincing if the opponent doesn't look at them too closely. A pink spray bottle appeared in his hand, and he sprayed himself in the face with pink mist, his wounds closing in an instant. Like I said, it's incredibly easy to fool people through their vision. All we needed was for you to kick up a cloud of dust as cover to warp everyone in and set up the illusion. You really think we'd fall that easily? Kyuka grunted as the spray bottle disappeared. I still don't know why you had to let yourself get hit. Do you know how close I was to a heart attack, babe? Izuku rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles, glaring up at Redistro. Had to sell the illusion. If it looked like everyone was dead, he'd just leave immediately. We need to keep him occupied here so he doesn't go to assist any of his other forces. Redistro took a step back, only for a massive metal nut to appear out of nowhere and slam into his spine, sending him stumbling forward. The leader of the Seijin students, dressed in a red ninja costume, held several normal-sized nuts between his fingers. Your first mistake was believing that only UA had the power to fight you. Shindo Yo slammed his palms into the ground. Just because our schools are less famous doesn't mean we're any weaker. Tremoring earth. The ground rumbled, and the street underneath the Titan cracked apart, sending Redistro plummeting into a hole under the pavement. The giant was buried up to his shoulders, rendering him unable to move. Izuku walked forward, green balls of light falling from his hair. The lights grew larger, until they covered his entire body. There was a flash of green light, and when it faded, Izuku bore golden gauntlets on his arms, along with 4 golden arms sprouting from his shoulder blades. Of course, your biggest mistake was thinking you knew everything about your opponents. You thought you had us all figured out, but you don't know the slightest thing about what we're capable of. Redistro shouted, Shigaraki. Assist your Grand Commander. The pale man emerged from a side alleyway, hands in his pockets. The Titan grinned, only to pause when none of the nearby students looked even the slightest bit worried. Izuku smirked. Oh, that's another mistake on your part. You assumed that everyone in your ranks was loyal to you, and you never suspected a traitor. Quite the strange assumption, considering how many traitors you planted in the ranks of the heroes. One of his fists cocked back, before punching upwards. A green ball of energy shot into the sky, before exploding high over Daika City. In an instant, several figures outside the city shot into the air, before all converging and falling to the ground around Redistro's trap form. When the dust settled, the Titan paled at the sight of every one of the heroes under his command. What? How did you know? Tenko chuckled, mechanical arms emerging from his back and attaching themselves to the hands on his wrists, removing them and causing them to flex. And here I thought it was obvious. I was never on your side, dipshit. I renounced the league months ago, but you never found out. So we decided to make use of that, and man, did you fall for it? Redistro scowled. You were with those filthy heroes the whole time. Tenko grinned. Bullseye, Grand Commander. You have no idea how badly I wanted to flinch every time you called me Shigaraki. I've hated that username ever since Player 2 rolled a nat 20 on Persuasion. I've got a much better one, Shimura Tenko. Redistro's scowl deepened, and a black glow spread across his darkened skin. The ground rumbled, then exploded as he burst free from his containment. I will not let this stand. I am Redistro. I am the Grand Commander of the Meta Liberation Army. I will not rest until we throw off the chains of oppression. You shall not hold back our righteous cause. Izuku snapped the fingers on his gold-plated left hand, and the surrounding students backed off. He walked forward, cracking all 6 sets of knuckles in quick succession. You claim to despise oppression, and yet your followers encouraged, no, participated in the mistreatment of a child. You claim to be for freedom, and yet multiple children in your care were pushed down and abused every damn day. You claim to be righteous, and yet you and your forces have committed some of the most despicable acts known to man. Your hypocrisy makes me sick, Redistro. Do you know who the last person to make me sick was? Overhaul, the former head of the Shihasaikai. Prepare to share his fate. The giant roared wordlessly, black energy building up in his right hand. Izuku's legs tensed. Redistro swung, and save point charged to meet him. Mei hummed nervously, glancing through the camera feeds from her swarm of recon drones hovering far above Daika City. To the north, there were numerous elemental attacks being thrown around, as well as massive geysers of dirt from the shockwaves produced by Mirako's attacks. To the west, the fighting was slightly less visible, but no less intense. But the real eye-catcher was the battle in the southern part of the city. She could barely see what was happening through the enormous flashes of green and black energy. Boss Kun was super powerful, but the enemy commander could match him blow for blow. Every clash reduced the nearby buildings to dust. Green orbs and black waves swept through the streets, leaving unmatched devastation in their wake. The only thing that she'd seen that matched this level of destruction was when All for One had detonated over Kamino. Kman, boss. My baby's survival is riding on you. You'd better clutch this out, or I'm revoking your baby privileges. Redistro shouted, you cannot defeat me. My meta ability is unrivaled in its power. Our cause is just. We will rise up against those who have oppressed us, throw off the chains of government, and create a world where meta abilities can be used freely. Izuku scowled and cocked his right fists. Oppression? Chains. Don't make me laugh. The quirked are the free, and the quirkless are the downtrodden. In society, nobody gives a damn about your personality, or your skills, or your training. No, it's all about what your fucking quirk is. You've got a flashy or combative quirk. Bam, you're meant to be a hero. You've got a healing quirk. Bam, you're destined to be a doctor. You've got a culinary quirk. Bam, you'll only ever be a cook. You've got a quirk that makes you look different. Bam, you'll never be more than a villain. God forbid, you've got no quirk whatsoever. Bam, you're never gonna be a goddamn thing in your goddamn miserable life. Each verbal jab was accompanied by a physical one, increasing in strength and fury until the final blow sent Redistro sliding back several blocks. Izuku leaped after the Titan, his anger sending bright green lines of energy running up his golden arms. The villain countered, meta abilities are restricted. The government makes it illegal to use an intrinsic part of ourselves, unless we pass an arbitrary test and get a shiny plastic card. Izuku roared, bullshit. Nobody gives a flying fuck about the quirk use laws unless it's in plain sight. I've watched someone subtly use a burst of air to propel themselves over a busy street, and a nearby cop saw it and did nothing. I've seen people with flying quirks lift themselves up just enough to reach an item on the top shelf, and not once did the clerk report them to the authorities. I've seen someone get dragged back into their house by a tendril of water, and a nearby hero just kept walking. Face it, Doofenshmirtz, your ideology is obsolete. Your precious Meta Liberation Army is dead, and its ideals would only make things worse. Redistro snarled, do not speak ill of our goals. Distro argued for the use of meta abilities in day-to-day life, for people to not have their natural powers chained down. Izuku retorted, Distro lived over a century ago. Get with the times. Quirks are an accepted part of society. Discrimination hits those without powers harder than those with them. You're trying to help people who don't need it? You're not fixing a problem, you're making it worse. The villain roared, enough. I will not stand here and debate politics with a mere child who clearly does not know the ways of the world. Prepare to meet your end, stubborn fool. Izuku's eyes blazed, and a green light shone from between his shoulder blades, a cloud of steam bursting from his 6 elbows. Pot, meet the goddamn kettle. Black energy filled Redistro's right palm. Stress output burden. Green energy covered Izuku's 6 fists. Wrath of Azura. The villain swung his hand, and a crashing wave of force exploded outwards, swarming over the nearby terrain. Izuku lunged and punched with all 6 arms at once, and a massive laser shot forwards, streaking through the air. The attacks collided, and a massive shockwave devastated the area, pulverizing the nearby buildings and sending cracks running through the streets. Green and black energy swelled, pushing against each other with both refusing to back down. There was a loud groaning sound, and 2 of Izuku's golden arms shattered, the stumps sparking. The green laser wavered, and the black energy began to push it back. The groaning grew louder, and 2 more arms broke off. The villain's attack began advancing faster, and Izuku grit his teeth. Redistro cackled. It's over, boy. You're finished. Izuku took a step back, then another. Then another. The force of the colliding attacks began to slide him backwards along the ground, his shoes screeching against the pavement. Izuku's brow furrowed, and his knees bent, digging his feet into the ground and halting his movement. I'm not finished until I'm fucking dead. Plus ultra. His remaining arms creaked, and suddenly green light began pouring out of them. The laser pulsed twice, and then suddenly grew to massive proportions. Shining green shoved back against writhing black, and Redistro's eyes filled with fear. What? Impossible. How? How could you have this much strength to give? Izuku shouted, because I don't fight for myself. I don't fight to win, or to improve. I don't fight for some abstract, unattainable cause. I fight to protect those who can't protect themselves. I fight for the people of Japan, of the world. I fight to save. With a wordless roar, Izuku lunged forward. Redistro's attack surged back in on itself, before the green laser split through. The villain choked in shock as he was caught in the chest, before being launched backwards through the air. The laser carried him over the streets, and he crashed into the base of Daika Tower. The energy petered out, and Redistro tried to draw breath, only for Izuku to launch himself forward, streaking through the air and cocking his right fist. As a not-so-wise man once said, it's over. Chapter 53. It was over. Izuku panted heavily, the golden stumps on his back still sparking. He stood at the edge of a massive crater, the remains of what used to be Daika Tower. In the center lay Redistro, his quirk depleted and his body at its normal size. His eyes were blank, a clear sign of his unconsciousness. They'd won. Izuku stumbled to the side, and his transformation disappeared in a flash of green light. He would have eaten dirt if Kaka hadn't rushed forward and caught him. You really need to work on staying conscious after using that transformation, babe. Izuku grinned weakly. Plus ultra, am I right? Katsuki walked forward with his arms crossed and huffed warmly. Well, you could have at least let the rest of us have a piece of him. Kman, We gathered everyone from our provisional license exam. Can't we give them anything to do? Izuku chuckled. Charge the remaining forces from behind. Hammer and anvil tactic, can't go wrong. Kendo Itsuka walked forward and huffed warmly, staring down at Izuku. 1B will take over from here. You hang back with your class and recover. You've done your jobs, now let us have some fun. Izuku's grin widened slightly. Go kick their asses, Battle Fist. Kendo smirked, before turning on her heel and raising her voice to address the gathered students from around the nation. Alright, heroes. This area's clear, but we're not quite done yet. The enemy army is still fighting the heroes to the west and the north, so let's go give them a helping hand or 100, yeah. There was a roar of agreement, and Izuku could hear the rumbling sound of the students' feet charging off through the city. Kyuka propped him up so that he could see the rest of the class approaching, and he grinned warmly. Good work, 1A. I've never been prouder to call you my classmates. He glanced over at where Yuga was standing, the blonde's hands laced together nervously. Oboro, send Yuga back to the classroom. There's a gift waiting for him in Netsu's office. The blonde's eyes widened, and he ran through the offered black cloud without a word. Katsuki watched him go with a raised eyebrow. What was that about? Tenko grunted. The doctor was keeping a student's family hostage to force said student to pass information on UA to the league. The pieces clicked, and 1A glanced at each other with worry. Momo sighed. Well, at least he has a happy family to return to. Izuku grinned wider. I wonder about that. Inko smiled softly as the Aoyama boy ran into the room, immediately spotting his parents and bursting into tears. As the family shared a long overdue hug, she turned to the principal and raised an eyebrow. So, how long until the next one? The mammal made a show of checking his watch. 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, the Yayorozu girl burst into the room, looking around wildly. Noticing the obvious absence of her parents, she frowned, before catching sight of the principal. She walked over and said, Midoriya-kun implied that my mother would be here. Where is she? Inko smirked and held up a sheet of paper. I recommend that you get used to calling him Izuku. After all, it'd be awkward to refer to your brother by your family name. Momo's eyes widened, and tears began to flow. You mean, you? Inko smiled softly and held her arms out in an invitation. Yes. The girl ran forward, pulling Inko into a tight hug. She whispered soothing words in the girl's ear, stroking her hair gently as Momo sobbed her heart out. Shouto glanced up as the door to Mike Sensei's office slid open, and he raised an eyebrow as Yagi Toshinori walked in. Really? You're bothering with me? Even after what I did to you? The emaciated man chuckled. I believe Yayorozu Shoujo made her thoughts on the matter quite clear, and I can't help but agree. Shouto huffed. Entirely fair. Still, why did you want to meet with me? Yagi-san sighed and walked over to the other chair in the room, sitting down and clasping his hands together. I have something I wish to share with you. You see, I had a strange connection to the man that stole your quirk, all for one. My quirk did not belong to me, originally. It was given to me as a gift. It is called One for All. Shouto hummed. Go on. Early in his life, All for One had a younger brother, who was presumed quirkless. All for One forced a strength stockpiling quirk onto this brother to make him subservient. However, the brother did have a quirk, the ability to pass his power to others. On its own, a useless quirk, but it merged with the stockpiler to become One for All, a quirk that can be passed to others and gathers the strength of every consecutive wielder. I am the 8th holder. I was born quirkless. Shouto raised an eyebrow. And you're telling me because? Please, let me continue. Originally, I had assumed that One for All only stockpiled physical strength. However, upon All for One's death, I realized that it was far more complicated than that. I could feel dozens of quirks within One for All. As it turns out, All for One and One for All were far more connected than I first thought. Under the effects of erasure, the barrier between One for All and All for One weakened. Before the villain detonated, several of the quirks in his stockpile crossed over and were absorbed into the core of One for All. I could feel the influx of strength just before the explosion. And I have determined that half hot, half cold was among them. Hope swelled in Shouto's chest. Does that mean, you could give my quirk back to me? Yagi-san shook his head and Shoto's face fell. Sadly, no. As the quirks were absorbed into one for all, they became inseparable from it, and so I cannot give them out individually. However, I do have an offer. Shoto's eyes widened as he put the pieces together. Sir. Yagi-san held out his hand. If you accept, I will give you one for all. You could use your original quirk again, and you would have access to the small arsenal of quirks within. You would also possess the strength I held in my prime, and then some. You would become far stronger than I ever was, and could ever hope to be. Shoto considered it. All that power. To be stronger than All Might. It seemed like everything he had ever wanted. And yet. He shook his head. Forgive me, Yagi-san, but I can't. To accept such power would feel like admitting failure. Admitting that I would never surpass my father on my own. So, I appreciate the offer, but I refuse. To Shoto's shock, Yagi-san smiled. To be honest, Shoto Shounen, I was hoping that you would. I have heard from your teacher that you have been, morose, as of late. As though you no longer had any purpose. But you've found your new goal, haven't you? Now that he thought about it, he did. Shoto did have a goal now. He nodded. You're right. I will be better than Endeavor. Not stronger, but better. I will be a hero without the power he thought was necessary. I will step out of his shadow and set myself apart from him by saving all I can. Yagi-san smiled warmly. I am glad to hear it, Shoto Shounen. Though, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more years than you'd probably like. A sad consequence of the circumstances that led to this moment. Shoto sighed and glanced at the tracking bracelet on his ankle. Yeah. I did a lot of things wrong, and I'm going to have to make up for a lot of them before I can take another shot at becoming a hero. 3 days later. True to form, Aizawa-sensei walked into homeroom right as the late bell rang. Morning, Hellspawn. Good to see you've all recovered from the fight at Daika. Indeed they had. After the fighting had ended for good, Oboro had warped them back to the dorms and they had immediately crashed. The following 2 days had been spent resting, relaxing, and recovering from the fighting. Of course, school waits for no one, so they were back to class as soon as they were back to full strength. Right. With the League gone, the Yakuza back in the shadows, and the Meta Liberation Army fully destroyed, we here at UA don't see that many possible interruptions to your education this year. He fixed the class with a deadpan stare. Of course, not even Nezu can predict how much trouble you Hellspawn will get into in second and third year. And since I apparently can't let you out of my sight, you're stuck with me for homeroom until you graduate. The class cheered, and the hero grunted warmly. Yeah, get it out now. You won't be cheering much once Nemuri starts teaching you about PR. 3 years later. Hanashi Urasai announced, welcome, one and all, to our biannual hero rankings. I'm certain you've all been waiting 3 years for this, so let's not waste any time. Here's our newest top 10. Starting us off, it's the rabbit heroine, Mirako. The crowd cheered as the infamous white-haired heroine bounced onto the stage, chuckling deeply. Well, it was fun being number one while it lasted, but these new kids can put up one hell of a fight. But that doesn't mean I'm done. Hold onto your hats, folks, the big bad bunny's still kicking major villain ass. The crowd cheered again as the heroine walked off the stage. Hanashi shuffled her notes and continued, moving on. At number 9, we have the chemical heroine, Acid Queen. A pink-skinned woman with yellow horns and a pink and blue leopard print jumpsuit skated onto the stage on a trail of liquid. Thanks, everybody. I never thought I'd keep up with the powerhouses of my class, and yet, here we are. I'm utterly psyched that I ranked this high, and I promise that I'll keep getting better. Up next, coming in at number 8, it's the Nitro hero, Ignition. A white blur sped onto the stage, sweeping Acid Queen off her feet and materializing into a figure in white armor with exhaust pipes coming out of its thighs. I must give my thanks to everyone who has helped me reach this prestigious position. I swear I will do my best to uphold the standards of heroism. Acid Queen snorted and flicked the figure's helmet. Kman, Tenten, you can be more informal than that. The figure groaned and began walking off the stage, the heroine still in its arms. Must I keep reminding you not to use that nickname in public? Who knows who would use that information against me? The crowd chuckled, and Hanashi joined them for a bit. Alright, Alright. Moving on, at number 7, we have the rainy season heroine, Froppy. A green blur shot onto the stage, and the crowd cheered at the sight of the familiar water-based rescue heroine at the microphone. Thanks, Kuro. It's crazy to think about how soon I got here, but that's not gonna stop me from doing my job. Thanks for all the support, Kuro. At number 6, it's the turbulent hero, Gale Force. A burst of wind announced the entrance of the famously loud hero, whose booming laughter was echoing throughout the room. Great to be here. Never thought I'd be among the ranks of the most famous heroes in history, but you don't see me complaining. I'm proud to be ranked with these passionate men and women. Hanasha cleared her throat as she shuffled her notes again. Next, at number 5, we have the sturdy hero, Red Riot. The famously bare-chested hero walked onto the stage, flashing his sharp-toothed grin at the cheering crowd. Thank you, all of you. It's pretty crazy how I've managed to outpace one of the manliest heroes I know, but not crazy enough for me to not know what to say. Which is to say, it's pretty damn cool for you all to support me this much. Coming in at number 4, it's the musical heroine, Jack Sabbath. The crowd cheered as a woman in a biker's vest and combat boots walked onto the stage, twirling her dangling earlobe around her finger. Thanks for all the support, guys and girls. Never thought I'd get this far, but that just goes to show the power of rockin' it with a full band by your side. Keep chasing those chart-topping dreams. Hanasha chuckled, before glancing back at her notes. Next, at number 3, we have the everything heroine, Creati. The crowd cheered even louder as a woman in a red and black jumpsuit walked up to the microphone, a red cloak draped over her shoulders. Thank you all. This means so much to me, to be ranked so highly, and so soon after my graduation. I hope I continue to live up to your expectations of me, and that I'll continue to inspire all who wish to follow in my footsteps. At number 2, we have the explosive hero, Ground Zero. The crowd went wild as a man with spiky blonde hair walked up to the podium, his signature black and orange mask on his face. Yeah, thanks or whatever. Let's just get this over with so I can get back to work. Of course, that just made parts of the crowd cheer louder, as the hero's gruff attitude had become one of his most admired qualities. Ground Zero grunted warmly as he walked over to a corner of the stage, crossing his arms and tapping his foot impatiently. Hanasha consulted her notes again, before nodding and facing the cameras. And last but most certainly not least, our newest number 1 hero, it's the inventory hero, Save Point. The curtains at the back of the stage split apart, and the crowd went nuts as the famous green-haired hero walked up to the microphone with a massive grin on his face. Thank you all, it's a great honor to be here. To be honest, if you had told me 4 years ago that not only would I be a hero, but the number 1 hero in all of Japan, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And yet, here we are. I'm so happy to be ranked this high, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished on the road to get here. Of course, there's still work to be done. There's always someone in need of saving, but that's nothing to fear. Why? Because we are here. This generation of heroes will stop at nothing to ensure that the public remains as safe as humanly possible. And I'm proud to be named the head of this amazing collection of people. Let's go beyond, everybody. Class 1A was forever immortalized in the minds of the public as the hero generation. Their contemporaries in 1B and the other schools around the nation were impressive, sure, but it was clear to everyone that these were the best of the best. Aoyama Yuga would finally reach his true potential once his parents were saved from All for One's followers. Starlight Nova went on to become a beacon of hope in both Japan and France, and his work as a diplomatic ambassador would revolutionize intercontinental trade and relations. Ashido Mina graduated at the bottom of her class, but she was far from incompetent. The chemical heroine, Acid Queen, would be a face for mutation and villainous quirks in Japan and abroad. She was widely known as a lover of fun and a friend to all, unless you were the unlucky sap who tried to cause trouble on her patrol route. Azui Tsuyu was the most well-known water-based hero in history, even more so than Gang Orca. Her work alongside Selkie and his crew on the Oki Mariner would set an example for water-based hero agencies around the world. Her siblings would brag to anyone they met about how their big sister was the coolest mutant quirked hero in the world, though some of her former classmates weren't far behind in their eyes. Aitsa Tinya would succeed his older brother as the head of Team Aitsa 10, and would mold the agency into a force for justice the likes of which had never been seen before. He also forged connections with multiple team agencies around the globe, sharing information and helping to deal with international incidents. There were also rumors that he'd formed a close friendship with one of his former classmates. Yurika Okako became the most prominent rescue hero in all of Japan, and eventually the entire world. She became well known for her cheerful disposition and eager nature, willing to help anyone she came across. She eventually hired Cementos as part of her agency, which earned a reputation for its efficiency at repairing collateral damage. She also became famous among the underground for her legendary fighting abilities and unofficially named Berserker Rage. Ajiro Mashirao would soon open a dojo in the heart of Tokyo known for its efficiency and its acceptance rates. So long as one showed the dedication to study, they were allowed to participate. Its students went on to become great fighters, though none quite managed to become true legends. Much like its head, to be quite honest. Kaminari Denki quickly became one of the most popular heroes in Japan, mainly due to his laid-back personality. He was as friendly as can be, always willing to strike up a conversation. He even managed to lead a second career as the equally famous streamer Sparkmaster69, and his gaming skills were second only to his former classmate. Kirishima Ajiro quickly rose through the popularity rankings, mostly on account of just how upbeat he was. Photos of the man making a sad face were as rare as hen's teeth, and nobody could feel down when he was out on patrol. He was most often seen in Isuha City, walking along the street and sharing a tray of takoyaki with fat gum. Kauta Kauji would silently fade into the background of rescue heroics, finding a place in the mountains close to the home base of the Wild Pussycats. Not a single mountaineer or skier was lost on his watch, and he consistently made donations to several charities and wildlife preserves, including Gang Orca's aquarium. While he never made headlines, the rock-headed hero was perfectly content with that. Satoru Kido wound up leaving heroics fairly quickly, not for lack of efficiency, but for lack of interest. He kept his license to use his quirk in emergencies, but retired from the busy life of a hero to open a bakery in the Hosu district of Tokyo. Anyone was allowed through the doors, so long as they never caused any trouble. Those who did were quickly shown just what had made him a hero in the first place. Shaoji Mezu, like his pink-skinned friend, would go on to become an advocate for those with unsightly mutations. His work as a hero led to multiple reforms and laws that just about eradicated discrimination against mutant quirks. He eventually opened an agency alongside a reformed Iguka Shuiki, codenamed Drazil. Jiro Kuka would eventually begin a second job as a freelance composer in addition to her career as a hero. Her labels frequently topped the charts, and she was a common guest on Put Your Hands Up Radio, even taking it over on occasion. She was sometimes commissioned for music pieces for HeroTube creators, made famous through the piece she'd composed to be Kaminari's channel intro theme. Shiro Hanta quickly found a sponsorship deal with a support company that specialized in restraining tools, much to Hatsume's chagrin. His low casualty ratings and charismatic nature quickly brought him into the top 50. He never seemed to rise much higher, but he also never seemed all that bothered by it. Tokoyami Fumikage would go into underground heroics, quickly making a name for himself as the Demon of Shadows. However, those who knew him would tell you that the brooding and mysterious nature was a facade he put on for hero work. When the costume came off, his true friendly personality came out. He, like Shaoji and Ashido, was also an advocate for mutants' rights. Todoroki Shoudo had a much longer stay at UA than he had initially expected. While there was no denying that Endeavor had been the main cause for his actions, that didn't change that he had hurt people. As such, he was required to undergo a villain rehabilitation course, which took 5 years under the supervision of Eraserhead. When he had finished, he quickly went about earning his hero license, taking up the title of the reborn hero, Icarus. He also changed his last name to Ketii, a symbol of his determination to never give up on the first dream he ever had, and a final step out of the disgraced flame hero's shadow. Yoarashi Ineza, much like Kirishima, would quickly become known as a friendly face and an energetic hero. His love of passion quickly sparked a massive following, and he had to take to patrolling from the skies so as to avoid the swaths of fans along the streets. He also struck up a friendship with the Air Force squadron that worked alongside Star and Stripe. Hagakure Toru would take her place among the few hybrid heroes, working in both the limelight and the underground just about equally. Her near monopoly on stealth earned her the nickname the Shadowless Ghost. Her bubbly nature also earned her quite the following of fans, especially younger girls. She even landed a commercial deal with a makeup company after she learned to undo her invisibility, a trick she'd learned partway into her second year at UA. Bakugo Katsuki would go on to amass a similar following to that of Endeavor's, only with about twice the size. His gruff nature and standard straightforward approach appealed to the same kinds of people, but his restraint and tactical thinking also made him a favorite of many others. Most importantly, he took to the number 2 position with substantially more grace than the former Flame hero. Midoriya Izuku would go on to become a household name, a symbol of hope in the same vein as All Might before him. Save Point was an inspiration to many a young child, and his nature as a late bloomer motivated both quirked and quirkless. He would frequently return to UA as a guest speaker and, after obtaining his teaching license, as a foundational heroics teacher. He even managed to keep up a streaming career as Boss Bushman, becoming well known in the gaming community for his incredible aim and his friendly rivalry with Kaminari. Jiro would occasionally appear in the background of his streams, the two managing to keep up their relationship around their respective careers. Aoyama Hitachi would succeed Eraserhead as the face of the underground, surpassing his adoptive father in skill and efficiency. However, unlike Eraserhead, Hypnose would occasionally make himself known to the public as an advocate for those with villainous quirks. He was also a regular customer at Sato's Bakery, which quickly morphed into a cat cafe and a meeting spot for underground heroes and vigilantes. Midoriya Momo would go on to be a symbol for young women everywhere. Taking to her hero work with gusto, she inspired girls across the country to stand up for themselves and fight for their own dreams. She even stepped out of her mother's shadow and distanced herself from the Yayorozu conglomerate. She became the founder of Creative Industries, her own support company that specialized in custom orders for its clients. And one of the few companies that earned Hatsume's approval. Shirakumo Aburo would graduate alongside 1A as the airborne hero, Loud Cloud. The name never garnered that much attention, but the blue-haired hero was fine with that. He spent most of his days patrolling around UA and catching up with his old friends. He was especially popular with kids due to his friendly and carefree disposition. Hatsume would quickly become a giant in the field of support, establishing Hatsume Industries as a major competitor. At one point, she received an invitation to the board of administrators for I-Island, but declined, wanting to stay in Japan with her consumer base. She continued to act as 1AS support technician for years, and her many scientific breakthroughs turned her into a self-made billionaire. Togata Mirio, Heidu Nejire, and Amajiki Tamaki graduated at the top of their class and with the public's full support. The three of them founded the Phantom Ferry Agency, based in Tokyo. They excelled in all cases, but their specialty was by far child abuse and kidnappings. They also kept up working relationships with Sir Nitai, Ryukyu, and Fat Gum. Aizawa Shouto would retire from hero work as soon as the hero generation graduated from UA, claiming that Japan's got more than enough heroes for a fossil to take his leave. He would continue to teach heroics classes at UA, finally making his marriage with present Mike public now that he felt he no longer needed constant vigilance. Yamada Hisashi would retire from hero work shortly after his husband, reasoning that he'd sung his heart out to the public, and his vocal cords needed a long break. He still kept up his teaching career and radio show, much to his fans' delight. Yagi Toshinori would continue to help teach business and heroics classes at UA, especially after obtaining his teaching license a year after his retirement from heroics. His decades of experience served him well to provide the next generations with the knowledge they needed to succeed. Midoriya Inko continued to serve as the vice principal for Musudafu Junior High. She and Kashiki Yonda quickly molded the school into a promising facility, well known for producing students with heroic attitudes and high potential. It rapidly formed connections with not just UA, but other major schools like Shikatsu, Kitsubutsu, Seijin, and CA. Shimura Tenko would complete his rehabilitation at UA and finally step out from All for One's shadow. He would then go on to become the Decay hero, Earthbreak, joining Froppy and Uravide in the ranks of Rescue Heroics. His mechanical arms bearing the hands of his late sister would soon become a sign of comfort to those facing disasters. Todoroki Tuyo would graduate from Kitsubutsu's villain rehabilitation course around the same time that Shouto finished his own. He kept the moniker Dabi, but utilized his talents for vigilantism instead of villainy. He and Detective Tsukachi formed a working relationship, wherein the detective would turn a blind eye to the vigilantism so long as Tuya didn't break any other laws. Toga Himiko graduated from Kitsubutsu's villain rehab course with flying colors, having finally received recognition of her quirk's dietary needs. She quickly gained control over her blood mania, and studied under Recovery Girl to become a respected doctor who specialized in cases related to anemia and other blood-related diseases. Jin would graduate from Kitsubutsu's villain rehab course after regaining control over his shattered mind. He went on to earn a therapist's license, specializing in cases of imposter syndrome and other forms of psychosis. He also earned a provisional license, and would occasionally assist heroes who were having issues near his clinic. Ayama Eri would grow up to follow in her adoptive family's footsteps, aiming for UA's hero course just like her parents and older brother. She would in turn under Recovery Girl and other supportive heroes around the nation, quickly making a name for herself as the healing heroine, Twilight. Izuku stepped out onto the balcony of his hero agency, known as the Inventory and located in the heart of Tokyo, a few blocks down from the Phantom Ferry Agency. Kyuka walked up next to him and laced a hand around his waist, leaning her head into the crook of his neck. "What ya thinking about?" He leaned his head on top of hers and smiled. "Just thinking about how far we've come. To think, less than a decade ago, I was a scared little kid who was just learning that he had a quirk. And now, here I am. Slayer of all for one. Destroyer of the Shihasaikai. Death of the entire Meta Liberation Army. The #1 hero of Japan. And all because I played a silly video game." Kyuka smiled softly and pulled him closer. "Life's weird like that." Izuku smiled wider and returned the hug. "And I wouldn't reset this save file for the world." Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.